Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our session. We are strategies to take care of yourself, mental health and community engagement work. Thanks so much for the people typing their favorite way to practice self-care in the chat. Really excited to see those. Exercise and walking the dog are really good ones for sure. But we can go ahead and get started with introductions. My name is Aaliyah. I'm the Alliance's new Hunger Free Communities Associate, and I'm joined today by two members of our Hunger Free Communities Advisory Council. And so I want to give Barbie and Callie a chance to introduce themselves, and thank you both so much for doing this session with me. And Barbie, if you'll start us off, that would be awesome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bienvenidos. My name is Barbie Izquierdo. I am the Director of Neighbors Community Engagement at Feeding America. I've been in the anti-hunger space for about 15 years. Last year, I won the Global Citizen Prize for my work defeating poverty. And as of June of this year, I'm a member of the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Callie, will you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Callie. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I am the Director of Shelter and Hotline Services for our local domestic violence shelter, Sojourner. I have worked in the space of homeless services and social services for over 10 years in this city, and I have been also part of the Results Experts on Poverty group for the last 7 years, that is for individuals with lived experience in poverty.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So, in this session, I'm going to be talking about protecting our mental health, specifically from burnout, but with special consideration for people with lived experience who are involved with community engagement work. So throughout the session today, I'm going to be giving suggestions on some daily habits we can all implement in our lives to reduce feelings of stress and burnout while we're so invested in this work, particularly community engagement work. That being said, here is our disclaimer to the audience here today that we are not mental health professionals, and this workshop is not meant to be interpreted as professional mental health advice. We are exclusively speaking from personal lived experience, and the tips and tools that we will share are only suggestions and tools that have worked for us personally, but hopefully incorporating those tools into your life will be beneficial as well. So moving on, I want everyone present here today. We have about 30 people here. I want everyone here today to be very grounded in this space. And this is going to lead me to my first topic and tool of breathing to regulate our nervous systems. As I'm sure you all know, our nervous systems are made of our brain, our spinal cord, and our nerves. It controls what we think, how we feel, and what our body does. It allows us to walk and breathe and learn and swallow, but it also controls how our bodies react in an emergency. So when our nervous systems are dysregulated or sensitive, it can feel like being constantly overwhelmed or stressed out. And that means that those with a sensitive nervous system are going to be especially prone to experiencing burnout due to a heightened response to stressors thrown at them. So here today, notice any tensions you have in your own body. And ask yourself if you're familiar with the ways that your body unconsciously holds tension. For example, do you find that your shoulders are raised a lot? Do you have a clenched jaw? Maybe in public, you try to make yourself smaller by tightening your body and are your hands balled up. Those are some really common examples. But take a moment to move your shoulders back, release those tensions. But note that all of those tensions that you may experience are signs to pay attention to, especially as many of us might be staring at a computer or sitting down for most of the day. So one way that we can begin to evaluate those tensions is through deep breathing to reset ourselves. So my first tool for us today starts with a quick 50-second breathing exercise. This is through a video called Calm, the Calm app. If you're unfamiliar with Calm, it's a free app that gives reminders and visuals for breathing every day. For example, if you decided you wanted to breathe for 2 minutes after lunch every single day, you would get a Calm reminder on your phone to do that. Deep breathing is a type of breathing that, of course, helps to oxygenate our blood and our nervous system, but it's also one of the quickest ways to calm our nervous systems. Because when we breathe deeply and intentionally, we're sending signals to our brain that tells any anxious feelings that we're safe and don't need to use a fight, flight, or freeze response. So with that being said, I'm going to play this video. The audio seems to be a bit loud, so I would just turn it down on your end. But let me go ahead and play this for us. Sorry, folks, I was totally muted. Anyways, I hope that that video was helpful. And thank you for participating with me with that. So moving on, I wanted to bring up why this topic is so important and why I felt like it was necessary for our summit today. And that is because the United States has a burnout problem. We are ranked globally the 10th most overworked country. And this statistic is kind of going unnoticed to me, but not unnoticed in that we don't recognize burnout as a legitimate issue. However, there's not very much information on how we can prevent burnout from happening in the first place or signs that it is happening. And that goes for anyone in a very broad sense, but let alone those with a very specific experience of having lived experience with the anti-hunger world. So I wanted to focus on 3 questions here today. So 1, what does burnout look like for those with lived experience? Second, what does burnout look like for those involved in community engagement work? Especially as individuals are giving so much of themselves, how can that become unproductive for overall health? And then lastly, what are some preventative measures that can be taken? And is it all up to us to have a grip on our mental well-being? Or is it also crucial to place some of that responsibility on companies and employers, et cetera? So our agenda today goes over what I'm calling Burnout 101, where I'll talk about what it is, what symptoms look like, and how we can recover. Throughout, I'm going to be incorporating tips and tools that can help us take care of ourselves in general, and again, with that specific audience in mind of those who have lived experience doing community engagement work. And then lastly, we're going to end with a panel with Kelly and Barbie, again, 2 members of our Hunger Free Communities Advisory Council. So moving on, when we talk about burnout in a very broad sense, it's very easy to say that America has a burnout problem, but it's harder to conceptualize what that problem looks like without some relevant examples. So here on this slide, I'm using Germany, a compare and contrast between the United States and Germany, because Germany was ranked one of the lowest countries facing burnout. So here on this slide are some of those findings. To start, there's actually a 425-hour difference per year when you compare work hours in the US and in Germany, which is so stark to me, honestly. In the US, it's estimated that only 1 in 5 workers actually sit down and eat lunch. We have about 705 million vacation days going unused, and 40% of employees are working 60 hours a week or more. Plus, this last statistic is from the Harvard Business Review that says that 125 to 190 billion dollars are spent each year in the United States on healthcare due to psychological and physical burnout consequences. And all of this is going to be directly correlated with workplace pressures that are placed on Americans just by our society. But when we look at Germany in contrast, we can see that that is a culture that influences work-life balances in a more positive way. And in the research that I did, German culture seems to really value cooperation and teamwork. Employees must be granted 11 hours of rest time in between each working day, and they actually have a burnout leave policy where any employee who is suffering from burnout can take up to 75 weeks off of paid leave, which is absolutely incredible. And the goal of that initiative is to help employees recover from their stress and restore their energy and motivation, which also benefits the employer by reducing turnover rates and healthcare costs. It's actually been proven that when we invest only $1 into mental health treatment for employees, there's a return of $4 in improved health and productivity. So going back to one of my earlier questions, there is so much an employer can do to reduce burnout. And so it's not entirely our responsibility to do so, though it is super important to have tools that work for us so that we can avoid being burnt out in the first place. So now that I've given a little bit of context, I want to move forward with this question: why do we share our experiences in the first place? Which is what got the ball rolling for me when putting together this session. As important as it is to share what we are going through as people with lived experience with hunger, I feel as though the flip side of that might not be discussed very often. So I made this list to understand some pros and cons that led me to ask what burnout looks like for those who are constantly talking about hunger while also experiencing hunger currently or having that experience in the past. So some of those benefits, as you can see here, include creating solidarity and building stronger relationships, as well as addressing pressing issues and practicing how to be vulnerable. Plus, being able to collaborate for solutions is really important. However, on the opposite end of that spectrum, repeatedly living traumatic experiences comes with that territory, as well as unintentionally becoming a face of an issue, which, as you can imagine, can make it really difficult to set boundaries, especially at work. I also have noted here that emotional labor is still labor that oftentimes goes unpaid. So now, moving forward with my Burnout 101, what is burnout in the first place? So Sheena Sky, who is actually a therapist who did a TED Talk on burnout a few years ago, describes it as an injury before something major happens. So she thinks of burnout as a physical injury, that if it's not rested, it will get worse. She says that burnout is the symptoms of your body telling yourself to rest before something worse happens to you mentally. The example she gave are long bouts of depression, for example. And then another professional, Dr. Jessica Metcalf, who teaches self-intelligence, has a burnout framework that's broken down into 3 components. So she describes burnout starting with exhaustion. So that looks like a mental or emotional and physical loss of energy. Then we have mental distance. Maybe you're becoming very irritable and having compassion fatigue. But burnout also has to do with a lack of self-confidence and feeling less than. Surprisingly, there's actually 12 stages of burnout. I'm only going to go over 5 with us today, but the fact that there's 12 is so crazy. But those 5 stages start with what is called the honeymoon phase. So this is likely where you're very engaged in your work, you're enjoying what you're doing, you have high energy and feeling rewarded, and you want to prove yourself by working harder. However, that can lead to the second phase called the stress onset phase, where you might still find your work rewarding, but stress will start to creep in. And that's not to say that stress is always a bad thing. We do need stress to wake us up in the morning and to motivate us, but too much stress can be very damaging. That being said, that can lead us to the third phase, a chronic stress phase. And this is a point where you're past healthy stress levels. Your emotions become harder to manage, your exhaustion increases, overall productivity and attitudes towards work are going to be affected, and recovery can become so much harder if your initial reaction, or anyone's initial reaction, is to deny or neglect that stress. That is what leads to the burnout phase, this fourth phase, where you're absolutely past healthy limits and chronic stress has pushed your body into a survival mode over a prolonged period of time. This is going to interfere with your ability to regulate your workload and facilitate recovery. That momentum carries us into phase 5, which is a habitual burnout phase. So this is a continual state of burnout, where you're likely to feel trapped, your ability to help yourself recover may have all but disappeared, and you're at risk for serious issues, such as depression or physical or mental collapse. And unfortunately, this phase is what pushes many people to stop working altogether. Burnout is a very gradual process. As it says here on the slide, full recovery actually takes 3 to 5 years, which was so surprising to me to learn. But that's because burnout is such a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can creep up on you. So here are some signs and symptoms that I put together. Some physical symptoms might look like insomnia, having headaches, or consistent fatigue. Emotionally, you might feel motivation loss or detachment from others. And behaviorally, this could look like chronic procrastination and reduced work performance and also outbursts. And then on this other side, on the right side, I have some other signs that include hostility, being anxious when having to share in public, and sometimes an unwillingness to accept feedback. But now that I've gone over what burnout looks like in a very broad sense, I want to focus on what burnout looks like for those with lived experience involved in community engagement work. So I'll do this by explaining the framework behind racial burnout, which was a term that was coined 5 years ago, and then applying that concept to hunger. So racial burnout happens to people who feel a deep emotional responsibility for eliminating racism. So this is going to look like a personal calling related to an identity rather than just a professional commitment. But that being said, anyone is going to be vulnerable to racial burnout when they're constantly aware of both the ways racism impedes on all of our lives. That looks like in the micro and the macro form. So that's being conscious of racism in interpersonal connections and also aware of overwhelmingly structural reinforcements of white supremacy. So this intense awareness of that issue creates emotional exhaustion and feelings of isolation from others who may not get it. And by that, I mean people who don't experience racism on the day-to-day basis. So racial burnout is going to look like a mistrust in the sincerity of others, which can show up as being hypercritical or in having like some vilification in there. But when we apply this concept of racial burnout to hunger, for example, we can refer to the same phenomenon as hunger burnout, where someone is constantly aware of the root causes of hunger, which include but are certainly not limited to racism and capitalism. But all of the issues that we see today are connected with each other. So that means that those with lived experience doing community engagement work aren't ever just talking about the issue of hunger, but are also discussing race, class, socioeconomic status, gender, and more. Therefore, extra consideration and grace has to be given for those with lived experience doing this work, because being able to educate and inform others can come at a price. And burnout can easily become one of those prices, which is something that needs to be prevented, especially now that we know how damaging burnout can be in the long run. And that fifth phase of having a habitual burnout phase, we want to prevent that at all costs. So before we move on to our panel, my last spiel talks about what recovery from burnout can look like. So to successfully recover from burnout, what we need to do is learn how to rest effectively. We learn how to rest effectively by being in the moment and prioritizing wellness in our lives, but also rethinking societal structures and redefining language that has been forced onto us. For example, you can think to yourself, what does productivity mean to you? Do you feel as though being productive means getting every task done in one day? Or maybe does it look like doing one task incredibly well and with intention? How do you define rest in your life? Is this just the time where you're able to sleep? Or can it be redefined as something more than that? This also means resetting our expectations and priorities and also implementing boundaries with the relationships that we have, whether that's in your family or in the workplace, etc. Proper rest is going to be doing things we love simply for the joy of it. doing things that regulate our nervous systems every day, and crucially, sitting with the discomfort of not doing. For those with the experience doing community engagement work, recovery from burnout is going to be everything that I mentioned previously, but also an emphasis on community care and wellness planning. By this, I mean dedicating time and energy toward building communities of care for themselves and being part of a quality community of practice that can give trustworthy feedback about how someone is showing up. Burnout can cause really stark shifts of energy and enthusiasm that are sometimes hard to notice. Um, the Audre Lorde Project, which is an incredible project, has a quote that says, "We have been taught and conditioned to turn to the state in moments of crisis and trauma. But in moments of community despair, we need to radically turn into each other with love and be present with each other with our hurts and needs and strategize as a community." So recovering from burnout for people with lived experience doing this work is going to revolve around a lot of community care, but also wellness planning. Wellness planning is simply physically writing out answers to questions like, what does your heart, body, mind, and community need? And who can support you with those needs? So the point of that is to name your current or anticipated needs and see who can support you in getting those needs met before getting into a habitually burnout phase, that fifth phase of burnout. So now I'm done talking. I am so excited to begin our panel with our HFC advisory members. Our first question, and I'll start with Callie. What strategies do you use or want to use more of to take care of your mental health?
Thank you. So definitely work more on all of the things that I try to do. But I think it's also important to realize when things stop working for you. So sometimes I'm like, you know what, I'm going to journal today. And sometimes it's like, no, that sounds terrible and it's not going to be helpful. So just recognizing that if there's things that have been helpful to you in the past and they're not helpful now, to take the time to reevaluate that. I really like to be outdoors, to be able to get some fresh air, go for walks. I'd really like to do that more. Unfortunately, we just got our first snowstorm here. So working through those things. And then really audible books. And I have a tendency to read really heavy, like things about poverty and about hunger issues. And then I'm like, you know what? I have to stop and read something funny or listen to something like in between.
Absolutely. That's really great. And I'll ask Barbie the same question. What strategies do you use or want to use more of to take care of your mental health?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think the first thing that I turn to is music. I feel like music is a place where you can find so many different ways to resonate to a story. And I like that feeling of not being alone without having to talk sometimes. So I love listening to
Absolutely.
music. One of the other things I do write and journal a lot, but like Callie said, sometimes it gets difficult. Before talking about poverty and all the things that I went through, the only outlet that I had was writing things down. And it was great for me because I didn't have to decide what I had to hide from people or how much to say. I can just release everything on this notebook. But as you mentioned earlier, Aaliyah, when you are working in a space where you're constantly like reliving or feeling re-traumatized by your circumstances, sometimes these things that you usually do can feel more like a burden or a chore. So when music and writing doesn't work, I like to travel, and that can mean whether I'm getting in the car and driving, going for a walk in a neighborhood that I haven't been to, or traveling across the country. I think sometimes disconnecting from what I see every day, especially because I work from home, just getting out the house sometimes is very helpful.
Yes, that is totally great advice, especially just knowing, and Callie mentioned this too, of knowing what your limits are. And so to move on, and Barbie, I'll have you start with this question. what are some tips or experiences that you can share about setting boundaries in a work setting?
This question is hard for me for a lot of different reasons. So um, I'm gonna start with my notes, like what I actually have written down that I wanted to say, and then go a little bit more into it. So,
Hmm.
a tip that I have is to make sure that you take time to sit with yourself and like reflect on your purpose. Reflect on what moves you, what makes you feel something, and work on strengthening your connection to that and with that. And it helps you get to know yourself better. um, I've been on a journey of getting to know myself, probably all of my life, and I think that I haven't had as much changes as I did this year. Um, I debated a lot about how much to say. So y'all know, if y'all heard me speak before, y'all know I'm a crybaby. I'm definitely fighting back tears. But that's one of the tips that I would say is, first of all, embrace how you feel, right? If you're not having a good day, if you feel depressed or that your productivity might be affected in the workplace, have someone in the work setting, whether it be your supervisor or just a colleague, that you can tell, what it is that you're going through, so that if your work is affected, if your productivity is affected in the work setting, then at least they know why. I know this is very difficult, and it's something that I do, but I don't want to pressure or force anyone to do something that they're not comfortable with. But in my experience, when I have shared, and I've shared everything from needing protection from like having a protection from abuse order, and making sure that a certain person can't access the building so that I can feel safer in doing my job. So that's a little extreme, but other times it could be something as simple as telling my boss, like, I can't show up on camera today. You don't necessarily have to tell them what it is that you're going through, but just providing some context is always helpful, because there's always these like, how much can we say in the workplace, how much shouldn't we say? And I think that humanizing the workplace is what needs to be done, so that organizations can be more empathetic to the situations that people are going through, and so that they can understand, life is gonna life no
Hmm.
matter what happens, and showing up is hard enough when you have all these other things going on. So making sure that you voice what it is that you need, even if you can't voice what it is that you're going through. Whether that means I need some time off camera, I need an extra 15-minute break, I need to take some time off, whatever the case may be, is very, very, very important. Um, Saying all of that to say, um, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder about a year ago, and it completely changed my life. Some of it made sense, but to me, a lot of it didn't. I've always like thought that I was just a passionate person. So if I'm really excited about something, it's just because I'm passionate. If I'm really sad about something, it's because I'm really hurt. So showing up in these rooms where people expect so much from you, and where you feel like you have to show up a certain way, is very, very difficult. And I've always talked about the importance of mental health, but I've never talked about my personal diagnosis. And I think that it's important to finally say it, because there's so much stigma behind like what being bipolar means,
Hmm.
what it is that you're capable of, just the people calling you crazy, or whatever the case may be. So saying all of that to say that transparency, although it's difficult, can help your organization find a way to work with you and find what are the best methods for your work ethic, and so that you can feel supported. But I want to make sure that I leave time for Callie, so I'm sorry, I'm going to end that there.
No, thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate it. You're getting a lot of love in the chat, but thank you so much. And Callie, I'll let you go ahead.
always hard to follow up, Barbie, but I appreciate your insight. Um, so I would definitely echo the things that Barbie stated and say, don't be afraid to speak up. Let people know what your boundaries are at work, and when they're crossing them. You're there to do a job. You are there because you are valued and they chose you to do that. That doesn't mean that you have to take on additional things. That doesn't mean you have to work additional hours. You are still a person outside of your work setting and you deserve to have them treat you that way. So I've been working on that myself, and it's scary because you want to make sure that you're always doing your best. And are you getting to the next spot? Are you going to be eligible for a promotion? And you need this job for many different things in your life. But having been in this field and in this space, both as someone with lived experience, as a professional, as an advocate for so long, it's draining. And I realize that I've been burned out for a long time, so I can't continue to go in that same way. So to me, I'm like, I do this work because I love it, but I need to realize what other things are important in my life, and I voice that. So just letting people know when you need help with collaboration, what kind of recognition is good for you, what is helpful, and what kind of support that you need. Because all of those things are really going to impact how you're feeling at work, and how you're feeling is going to impact the productivity that you have and the impact that you have.
Absolutely. That's so great. Thank you so much. Thank you both for sharing. Such a great panel. It's such a honor to be working with you guys. So moving on to our next question, and Barbie touched on this a little bit already, but and Callie, I'll start with you this time if that's okay. But how do you think organizations can be more sensitive to those with lived experience? I talked a little bit about how there is a certain responsibility on our employers and on the organizations that we work for to help us in whatever way we can. It's not always just up to us. And so I'm just curious on your thoughts about how they can show that sensitivity um, in this field that we're in.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for organizations to realize when it comes to their staff with lived experience and with individuals that they're advocating on behalf of, just because you're an expert on something, just because you have that experience doesn't mean that you have to share that experience when people want you to. It doesn't mean that your experience and your story is not your own to decide on what to do with, and just being respectful of that, because nonprofit and fundraising is hard, and we always want to lean in on like, okay, we have these goals to meet, and like, let's have this person talk about it, but are they in the space to do it? Do they want to do it? And making sure we're respecting their time, and making sure that organizations are compensating individuals for their time and not just taking advantage of their expertise without paying them, because you wouldn't have someone come in from the medical profession without paying them for their time. So you shouldn't expect someone with lived experience not to be paid for their time either.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, to all of that. I wholeheartedly agree. And Barbie, I think you're there. If you wanted to add any thoughts on how you think organizations can be more sensitive to those with lived experience. Yes.
to care about us.
Mhm.
There's always a lot of expectations. The tasks never change. What happens is, how do we deal with it? How do we adjust our lives to make sure that the tasks can get done and we can still live? I think the way that I've personally coped with it is like turning my pain into this perseverance that doesn't let me stop. But you can't explain that to an employer, when you want them to be sensitive to things. So I think that I've mentioned before, I think cultural competency trainings are very, very, very important. I think that we should also be thinking about emotional intelligence training. Like, what are some of the ways that we can emotionally be there for our colleagues and our coworkers in a respectful way, and still understanding that, we know we have things to get done, but if we're not taking care of our people, the work isn't going to get done right. And it affects the people that we care about. And I think that that's worth so much more. It'll also help with retention. When people can tell that an organization cares about them as a person, they are not going to want to leave. So yeah.
Yes.
That's that.
No, that's great. And can everybody hear us now? I'm seeing in the chat that there might have been. Okay, I think that we are heard now. But yes, I totally agree with what you're saying, Barbie. And it just goes to show, my example with how German culture is looking when it comes to their burnout rates. It's because they look at people holistically and want them to focus on their passions and themselves outside of work. And so if we can get to a place in our culture where that can be also valued, that shift would be absolutely incredible for us. Yes, Megan said we do not have to participate in the overwork culture that is accepted and encouraged. Exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
Absolutely. If there's anything that I would add, and not for this, but just the tips part, that I can't get over the fact that I didn't say it. And I'm reminded because of Megan. Thank you, Megan. Hi, I love you so much. I miss you. Big hugs. Having a support system is very, very, very important to this work. As I said before, I work from home, so when I leave the stress from here, I'm already home. I'm with my kids. It's hard to like take away from this, but I do have a support system. And I want to encourage people to seek out their community. A support system doesn't necessarily mean that you need 30 people who are going to be there. It could just be one who's going to listen to you, who you can vent to. And I think it's so important to prepare people for these conversations as well, because I know that's something that we didn't talk about. So, for example, when I need to vent and I call my best friend, I check in and ask her, like, do you have capacity for this? Like, how are you doing? What how are you feeling on the inside, before I just be like, girl, let me tell you how much my life is a mess. But making sure that you check in with that other person, and giving disclaimers that what you might say might be a little traumatic, just giving that consideration. But I had to say that because I didn't say it earlier and it was bugging me, and I just had to let it out.
No, yes, this is the space for that. It is so important to get permission to have that space to vent, as Callie mentioned in the chat. That was so great. Thank you both so much for your expertise, your thoughts, your willingness to share. It's deeply appreciated, deeply, deeply appreciated. We have 5 minutes left in our session. If anyone in our audience has any questions for Callie or Barbie or myself, please feel free to put them in the chat. But my last slide is one more breathing technique. I wanted to introduce you all to the 4-7-8 breathing technique. This is based on the pranayama breathing exercise, which is an ancient yogic practice for controlling your breath. These types of mindful breathing exercises have been shown to have many benefits for stress reduction and relaxation. It was developed by Dr. Andrew Weil. He refers to it as a natural tranquilizer for the nervous system. He's referring to the sympathetic nervous system, which controls our body's stress response. So that is what controls our rest and relaxation response. So when we activate one of those, we suppress the other one. So that's why deep breathing is so effective at causing that relaxation response. So I wanted to end our session today by breathing together for 1 minute and 15 seconds. This video, by the way, is not by the Calm app, but just found on YouTube, another great free source for breathing exercises and techniques such as this. And then after that, if there are any questions in the chat, we'll go over those, and then we'll just do a quick wrap up. Again, I would turn your volume down on your own devices because it seems to be really loud whenever I play it. But let's go ahead and do that. I'll let everybody just turn down their devices for a second. Okay. Okay, perfect. That was the end of that, and that concludes, starting over, that's not what I want. Okay, yes. So that concludes our session today. I want to thank you all so much for your attention and participation. I hope this session was beneficial to you. Thank you so much to Callie and Barbie again for your time and energy and your vulnerability being here today. We all really, really appreciate it. It looks like we do have 1 minute and 45 seconds left. I would love if you have time in the chat before we move on to our closing session to let us know one way that you're going to use time in the future to take care of yourself, whether that's through more breathing. That might look like downloading the Calm app, taking a walk later after our session, hydrating yourself. We would love to know. And thank you all so much again.